Welcome. Hi. I'm Christina Cabrera from Uruguay. Came to this country 20 years ago. Adopted by the Bukasik Wampanoag tribe of Wampanoag Nation. I'm speaking as the Environmental Director of Indian Affairs for the Bukasik Wampanoag Land Trust. And I'm looking around this room and I'm concerned about what I hear. I'm concerned about the makeup of the room and I'm concerned about the testimonies, except for one question about racial and environmental justice from Senator Don Ewer. I don't see our communities reflected here. Low income, people of color, Black, Indigenous. Janet, we've been together and I'm doing races and trainings that we brought to the state of Rhode Island. We're happy that some government officials have taken those trainings and we encourage people to continue, but they need to be applied immediately because there is no time for our communities. We cannot have an LNG facility, a liquefied natural gas facility in the state of Rhode Island. We cannot clean brownfields and then turn around and throw toxic in the west, in Washington Park, in Southside, and all the communities that are never at the table, that don't have a voice. It is concerning that the greatest, what I'm hearing is the greatest achievements have been in cleaner air quality. When I used to work in the Environmental Justice League of Rhode Island, we did air quality monitoring controls, together with RIDO, the Department of Health. The Washington Park with Providence is the highest hotspot asthma area, where children are constantly going to the emergency room for asthma. I walk those neighborhoods. I am in those neighborhoods. I don't see the parks. I don't see the recreation. I don't see the beautiful Rhode Island that everybody sees and says, where are people living? Because if you go there, you can't even stand the smell. I stood there in Washington Park neighborhood for 2 hours supporting some of the neighbors. I went sick. I went home sick. Next time I went, I brought gas masks with me and shared them with others because you cannot stand the environment that you have to breathe in there. So if we're not working to improve the lives of those who are the lowest income communities, or people of color, the ones that are struggling, and we pat ourselves in the back for all the nice beaches, which are very good and very important, and all the recreation parks, which are very good and important, we're missing the point that we're all in the same boat, and we cannot forget what are half of our community. So, in this light, the NoLNG campaign, LNG, we all know, liquefied natural gas plant from National Grid, has written a statement, and they have asked me to come today because there were many, many people who really wanted to come today, but due to work, families, and other complications, they aren't able to be here. So they sent this statement via email and writing, and they've asked me to read it out loud. I went through, this statement mentions the process that happened for the approval of this liquefied natural gas plant. I testified in those hearings. They were horrific. If that I'm doing racism training that we went through, and I was co-trainer and helping the trainers from PISA, People's Institute for Survival and beyond, the hearings were the total opposite of those trainings. I was sick to my stomach of having to go through those kinds of hearings from DEM, led by DEM. And so here is a little bit of the community's voice in this testimony. The community, frontline communities of color, people of color, Indigenous communities, Black communities, low-income communities are opposed to the reappointment of Janet Coit. And this is your testimony opposed to the reappointment of Janet Coit. Janet Coit's actions and decisions around National Grid's application for the Land Department's environmental management permit, the permits required to build a liquefied natural gas LNG plant on Allen's Avenue demonstrates either an inability or an unwillingness to fulfill her responsibilities to Rhode Island's environment and inhabitants. The construction and operation of the LNG facility poses grave risks to the natural and human environment, including risks to human and infrastructure safety through gas leaks and explosions, risks to human health through the disturbance of industrially polluted soil, risks to water and infrastructure due to the facility's proximity to a flood zone, and the climate risks posed to the human and natural environment through the facilitation of extracting, exporting, and burning fossil fuels. These risks were detailed and attested during the permitting process by experts and members of the community, despite barriers to community participation. And there were such barriers because at one of the hearings I was not allowed to go in because I had a laptop with me. Members of the community had to demand a public involvement plan, PIP, in order to have their concerns acknowledged by RIDEM. Once that PIP was in place, RIDEM continued to provide barriers to community participation by holding 2 out of 3 of the required community meetings in locations with a record of hostility and risk for residents of color. One, the Providence Public Safety Complex, which houses the Providence Police Department, whose history of racial and economic discrimination is sufficiently well documented to have necessitated the Providence Community Police Relations Act and the Police External Review Board. And or location remote from the neighborhoods nearest to the proposed LNG facility site and with limited or costly parking, which was the Veterans Memorial Auditorium, a 20-minute drive from South Providence or Washington Park, the neighborhoods which are closest to the proposed facility. RIDEM, with Director Coit at its head, defended itself and the community in order to proceed with decisions that damaged the community. And while community members, despite these barriers, presented and supported their objections and lack of consent to the facility, RIDEM ignored these objectives and approved both the short-term response action plan and the water quality certification that allowed construction to proceed. Director Coit failed to exercise the opportunity to safeguard Rhode Islanders, including some of the state's most vulnerable residents, and was willing to treat a working-class community of color already living in toxic conditions as a sacrifice zone for a polluting industry. Further, both the state of Rhode Island and the city of Providence have committed to drastic reductions in fossil fuel emissions in order to mitigate the effects of climate change, which poses unique threats to Rhode Island's many coastal ecosystems and communities through the sea level rise and storm surge, as well as high food and water insecurity and infrastructure failure that will affect low-income communities of color first and worst. But RIDEM's decisions, with Director Coit at the head, have enabled an increase in climate warming emissions through the facilitation of the processing and sale of natural gas, as well as the energy costs of operating the facility itself. At the time at which the permits were issued, the LNG facility was projected to cost $180 million to build, a cost that would be passed on to ratepayers. Director Coit's short-sighted approach to leadership and her narrow interpretation of the charge of RIDEM have put Rhode Island residents, Rhode Island infrastructure, and the Rhode Island economy at unnecessary risk, and her appointment should not be renewed.
Thank you, Christina. And the committee does have a copy of the letter as well. Are there any questions for Christina?